Hi, good morning. I'm Yasir. I've had a haircut since that last photograph was taken. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning to speak to you. I'm calling in from Amsterdam here in the Netherlands, which is our headquarters. And yeah, I've got about 20-ish minutes to talk about artificial intelligence in agriculture. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. It's what my company Connecterra does. And I'm really pleased to also share with you that very recently we brought our product and services to the New Zealand market in partnership with Fonterra Farm Source. So we're now in New Zealand as well, and it's a country that I'd love to visit. And hopefully next time around I'll be there in person. So let's warm things up a little bit. I know it's early in the morning for you. Your coffee's still about to kick in, and I thought we'll have some fun with the first few couple of slides. And what I wanted to show you was just starting off with this particular one. On the left is a original image of a pretty regular door front. And on the right is a variation of this image. And you must be wondering, well, why the heck am I showing you door frames and interior design photographs? And the reason is that this has actually been generated, the one on the right has actually been generated by an artificial intelligence. The one on the left is the original. The one on the right is made by an AI artist called DALL-E. And DALL-E has been a very interesting project done by OpenAI. You can go to their website and check it out, and is now known as an AI artist. In fact, the capabilities of DALL-E are pushing the boundaries of what is really possible with artificial intelligence, especially in the field of images. And they took this to a whole different level very recently when DALL-E was actually merged with a language model. And you could actually type a description of an image that you would like to see, and DALL-E would generate this image for you. So, for instance, if you wanted to see an armchair in the shape of an avocado, you will be able to see that. Moving ahead from there, if you actually wanted to see an image of a baby daikon radish in a tutu walking a dog, DALL-E has also been able to generate a fairly interesting series of images of these representations. They have a bit of cheek to them, super interesting. And the reason why I share this is just what is happening in the field of artificial intelligence in general and how these AI models are beginning to evolve. More recently, and some of you might have seen this, Google's Lambda model, which is essentially a language model, also known as a chatbot, has made a lot of news. And the engineer, one of the engineers who works on this team, was essentially having a conversation with this chatbot that's powered by artificial intelligence. And at the end of that, he believed that this chatbot had actually become conscious or had a soul. And the reason for why he thought about this, or why he thought this was the case, is the responses that Lambda was giving him, is the name of the chatbot, were pretty much what a human or an intelligence would actually say, and he couldn't decide if this was real or not. Interestingly, he was put on administratively for breach of his contract of confidentiality. However, the whole transcript is available online, and I had to read of it, and it is really something else. And if you go back to a couple of years, AI technologies were nowhere near the sophistication of where we are today. However, they're not about to take over the world because artificial intelligence models, even the most sophisticated ones, are also susceptible to some pretty interesting attacks or workarounds where you can see their limitations. On the left, for instance, is an AI that classifies images and correctly classified this apple as a Granny Smith apple with a 85% accuracy. But you just put a sticker of an iPod on it with the words iPod written, and it thinks it's actually an Apple iPod because you have Apple and it says iPod. Therefore, it must be an Apple iPod. And the point I'm trying to make is that models today lack a certain understanding of concepts and context. They're very good at mimicking, which are the large language models that I talked about earlier, but they're not about to take over the world today. And these models and these conversations are very interesting to talk about, and they're fun to solve technically in big conferences. And technically, these are really, really interesting solutions. However, my company and my team has been working with AI-based applications in the real world, and we've learned that it's actually going to take a lot more than flashy demos for us to get artificial intelligence in the real world. And the fact is that when we talk about agriculture and when we talk about farms, pretty much every aspect of a farm has an AI-driven use case. And I believe that this technology and the power of this technology needs to solve real challenges that we are facing. Speaking of real challenges, let's talk about climate change. Let's talk about how big a problem we face as humanity today. And about 26 or 30%, depending on which way you measure it, of emissions that we have to reduce are coming from the agriculture space. Now, the question is, can we use AI for this? Now, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this today. And we need to be able to solve this in some pretty aggressive policies. And New Zealand very recently has started to adopt some of these policies. We're seeing this happen in Europe. We're seeing this happen in the US. However, we will need all the help that we can get. And this is a little bit of a busy chart, but in general, I want to point your attention to two things that I believe are really interesting to look at. The first is we can achieve a 14% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from food if we get towards higher yields. That sounds like a pretty much of a no-brainer. The other one is best practices on farm. How can we lower what is called the emissions intensity? And essentially what this means is how can we lower the amount of greenhouse gas produced per quanta of food, whether that's calorie or pounds of milk, etc. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these two. Let's talk about yields first. So we looked at applying artificial intelligence technology to, for instance, we work exclusively in the field of dairy. And the chart that you're looking at, for those who are in the dairy industry will probably see this one very familiar, is essentially the lactation curve of a dairy cow. So down here on the x-axis is day 0 when the cow starts to give milk, and the x-axis goes to 400 days into the future, and the y-axis is the amount of milk. So that's what this chart is. And this gray line or gray area in the middle is the amount of milk that a cow is going to produce. And you can see that it peaks somewhere around 50 days, and then it begins to reduce. The daily milk yield begins to reduce. So we trained a machine learning model, and we gave it about the first 50 days of data. And this AI or machine learning model was able to predict the amount of milk this cow would produce for the next 350 days with an error rate of less than 1%. In fact, it was a 0.8% error rate. And we got really excited about this because the performance of this model was very, very good. In fact, from the literature that we'd seen, we believe that this is one of the top performing models. All right, great. So we've got a machine learning model that predicts lactation curves and milk yield. Fantastic. What does this mean? Let's talk about it. Now, we did another experiment. So we predicted the milk yield of this cow, but in reality, this cow got sick, and she got sick at about 110 days. And what then happened is that we said, aha, so she actually lost some efficiency because she got sick. But had she not gotten sick, what would have happened? And the delta between the two is the lost efficiency of this individual animal. Now, let's talk about this in the context of farmers and saying, well, AI has figured out how much you could potentially have increased your efficiency if the cow hadn't gone sick. And we have now AI models that can actually predict diseases that are happening with your herd or health issues that your herd is facing with very high degree of precision and recall. And if farmers were to adopt these type of technologies at scale, we will be able to improve the top line productivity of their herd simply by improving animal health. And this, I believe, is one of the things that can help in the journey that we need. However, let's take a step back and say, all right, if we need to reach target efficiency levels for our climate targets on a farm, how do we make the best decisions? What decisions can I make today as a farmer that are going to help me achieve this net zero or 1.5 degree path that we need to achieve? So we did another experiment. And in this case, we took a typical Dutch dairy farm. We calculated the amount of emissions that this farm would have based on accredited data and carbon accounting standards. And then we've built an AI model and said, all right, project this farm into the future. In fact, we projected it 5 years into the future, and help me figure out what interventions I need to take in order to maximize my greenhouse gas efficiency levels. And the model ran tens of thousands of simulations. It looked at many different variables and came back and said, great, you need to look at these two KPIs, preg rates and VWP. And it looked at other KPIs as well. And then for this particular farm, if you did these two things, you will actually be able to make a pretty good gain of carbon carbon avoidance or carbon removal. And it turned out that we could help this farmer with about a 5% efficiency on their methane target, which is about 181 tons of carbon equivalent. Now, these results will vary from farm to farm. Some farms might be higher, some might be lower. It will vary by region, it will vary by farm type, but at least we're making the first inroads into using machine learning to help solve for some of these hard problems within the field of agriculture and farming. And for me, the bigger picture here is that AI can empower farmers to eliminate the use of heuristics. And what we see in many of our customers in many regions is that there's an enormous amount of data on farms. There is a lot of data being generated. However, farmers tend to use heuristics because it's almost impossible to process all of this information and to do some of these models that we are building and do some of these simulations. And AI can use all of this data and translate this into personalized metrics, which are simple and easy for us to follow and help us get to these target efficiency levels. Now, talking about data, one of the things with, let's say, real world challenges with artificial intelligence is that you're going to need a lot of data. In fact, if you talk to any data scientists or expert, they'll say, well, there's actually no upper limit to the amount of data you need. And my team keeps telling me this when I say, okay, how much data do you need? And they're always like, well, whatever you've got. And if we need to train models like DALL-E, or if we need to train models like Lambda, keep in mind, these are being trained on enormous amounts of data. They're really trawling the internet and they're building these models on thousands of CPUs. And that is why these models are becoming so powerful. And if we want to do this in agriculture, we're going to need a lot of data. The irony of the situation is that farmers don't like data entry. At least most of the farmers that I've met, nobody's ever raised their hand and said, I wake up in the morning so I could fill in forms. This never happened for me. And McKinsey did a study where they looked at, well, what type of data are we going to need if we need to make carbon verification models? Turned out you need about 3 to 9 years of historical data, you need hundreds of data fields, you're going to have lots of stakeholders on the farm. And if farmers aren't going to want to do this, which is very fair and understandable, how are we going to then generate some of the information that we need? And I believe that one of the things we're going to need to do for AI adoption in agriculture is make data management disappear. Now, we can do this with the use of sensors, with satellites, with automating things and making software and technologies that can make the job of data management disappear from that of the farmer and be able to give us the information that's needed to generate AI models. Of course, this has to be done in a manner that is compliant with privacy standards and there are no unintended consequences. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The second challenge of AI in agriculture is that these technologies need to be easy to use and they have to be very high performing. One of the things that we've learned is that in the field of software and especially AI, there's a lot of edge cases. And your data scientists will say, well, that's an edge case. It doesn't quite really work so well. Very much like that iPod attack that I showed you earlier. That's an edge case. But in the real world, you can't have too many of them. In fact, you're going to have almost zero because farmers can't afford that when an edge case happens and they're relying on your product, that it doesn't work. So it is the job of technology companies and AI companies to make sure that the quality, the price performance ratios are really up there. And it is easy to use for the customer because that's how we're going to get adoption and the data that we need to generate these useful models. And the current state of affairs is on the left, where you actually have to use rows and columns and you have to go fit in a lot of these data sets and you have to then figure out what they mean. And on the right is an example of a modern AI-based service that's sort of doing the same thing, looking at milk analysis, for instance, but making it easy and at the same time making it an ease of use design pattern to say, let's capture some information while we're at it as well. And these are the type of technologies and design approaches that we're going to need to take for adoption of AI in this space. The third and final challenge that I would put up of AI in agriculture, I know that I'm talking about challenges, but I wanted to come to the last part of this in the end, is we have to look at AI and data in a way that it doesn't have unintended consequences. And we've seen this over the last 15 to 20 years in the tech industry where AI companies or tech companies are using AI in a way that has been demonstrated to be harmful, whether that is through screen addiction or having sort of graphs of our eyeballs that we can continue to be served ads. And the problem over here are the business models, because the business models incentivize certain types of AI or ML developments that have unintended consequences at a very big scale. And if we're to introduce AI in agriculture, this is one of the things we really have to be careful about and we have to think about it before we launch it. And this is one area that I personally feel very passionate about. However, for all of the promise that I've shown you earlier of where AI can help, the challenges that we have, I believe there's never been a better time to build. And AI is a technology that's going to enable us to do a lot of things. Today, we're using AI to land rockets on their feet. We're using artificial intelligence to predict protein sequences. We're using AI-enabled robots to crawl fields and map individual plant. Every single plant is being mapped. We're using AI to predict health issues with animals. And these are all examples of great progress that we're making in this field. And I'm really excited and encouraged by where we are going, despite the challenges that we face. What are we working on? We're working on an AI that can empower our farmers. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. I hope you enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much for your time.